Billionaire's hands trembled as he held his weakening son, watching the baby refuse every bottle for the third day straight. 5 specialists had failed. $7 billion couldn't make his child eat. Then the cleaning woman stepped forward with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Sir, please forgive me, but I have milk. Let me help your baby." Welcome to our channel Truth Turn Stories, where real-life truths turn into powerful lessons. If this story speaks to you, subscribe and support the journey. The penthouse suite glowed with the amber light of dawn, but inside, desperation painted a darker picture. Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan high-rise, holding his 6-month-old son against his chest, feeling the tiny ribs pressing through the baby's silk onesie. Little James hadn't eaten in 3 days. The most powerful man in American tech, worth $7 billion, couldn't save his own child. Tears streamed down Marcus's face as he whispered prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. Behind him, the 5th pediatric specialist in as many days packed her expensive medical bag with a defeated shake of her head. Money, Marcus realized with crushing clarity, couldn't buy everything. His son was fading, and he was powerless. The nightmare had begun 6 weeks earlier, when James's mother, Marcus's wife of 3 years, died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. One moment she was nursing their son in the nursery of their Connecticut estate, laughing at his little coos. The next, she was gone. The grief nearly destroyed Marcus, but he had to be strong for James. Except James stopped eating. The baby refused every formula, every bottle, every specialized nutrition the best doctor's money could hire could provide. He would scream and turn his head away, his little face growing more gaunt with each passing day. Marcus hired round-the-clock nurses, consulted with specialists via video from Switzerland and Japan, even had breast milk flown in from milk banks across the country. Nothing worked. James would take a few drops, then refuse, crying until his voice grew hoarse. The doctors used words like failure to thrive and talked about feeding tubes and hospital admissions. Marcus felt his world crumbling. He had built an empire from nothing, rising from a struggling single-parent household in Detroit to the heights of Silicon Valley success. He had conquered every challenge through sheer will and intelligence. But he couldn't help his own son survive. In desperation, Marcus moved into his company's corporate apartment in the city closer to the best hospitals, leaving behind the estate that held too many memories. He worked from the apartment when he could focus, which was rare, while a rotation of medical professionals monitored James constantly. The baby grew weaker. His cries became softer, more pitiful. Marcus barely slept, barely ate, holding his son through long nights, feeling helpless in a way that no amount of wealth could remedy. His assistant tried to manage the business crises piling up during his absence. His board of directors whispered about emergency succession plans. Marcus didn't care. Let the company fall. Let the empire crumble. None of it mattered if he couldn't save his son. He fired specialist after specialist, not in anger, but in despair, knowing they had tried their best and failed. He researched obsessively, reading medical journals at 3 a.m, searching for answers that didn't exist. Friends called with sympathy and suggestions. His own mother, elderly but strong, came to stay and help, her presence a comfort even when solutions escaped them both. She held James with tears in her eyes, singing the same lullabies she had sung to Marcus decades ago, and the baby would quiet briefly, as if remembering some ancient comfort, before the hunger pain would return and the crying would start again. On the morning everything changed, Marcus was past exhaustion, past hope, running on empty reserves of determination alone. The apartment needed cleaning despite the crisis, or perhaps because of it, maintaining some illusion of normal life. The building's housekeeping manager had called twice, and Marcus had finally agreed, barely paying attention. He sat in the nursery, rocking James mechanically, when he heard the quiet knock and the door opening. A woman's voice called out softly in accented English, respectful of the obvious distress in the home. Marcus didn't even look up as the cleaning woman entered the room where he sat. She was middle-aged, wearing the simple blue uniform of the building's service staff, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Rosa. She began quietly tidying, respecting his space, but he felt her eyes on the baby, on James's tiny, too-thin frame. Then she did something unexpected. She stopped working and approached him carefully. Her eyes were filled with such compassion, such genuine pain at seeing the suffering child, that Marcus met her gaze. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "please forgive me for speaking, but your baby, he is very sick." Marcus nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "My sister," she said carefully. "She just had a baby 3 months ago. She has much milk, too much. She donates to the hospital." She paused, wringing her hands. "I had a baby too, my last one, only 8 months ago. She trailed off, looking embarrassed, touching her chest. "The doctors, they give the baby's milk from banks, from bottles, but it is not the same," she continued, her words coming faster now, urgent. "Sometimes babies, they need more than milk. They need—" She struggled for the English word, then placed her hand over her heart. "They need love. They need to feel the heartbeat, like with their mother." Marcus stared at her, understanding dawning through his exhausted fog. This woman, this stranger, was offering something unthinkable, something that crossed every social boundary he had ever known. She was offering to nurse his son. The educated, rational part of his mind raised objections. This wasn't done. There were health concerns, protocols, boundaries. But another part of him, the primal father desperate to save his child, recognized truth in her words. James wasn't just rejecting nutrition. He was grieving, in whatever way an infant can grieve, for his mother's heartbeat, her warmth, the irreplaceable connection of life. Rosa saw his hesitation and knelt beside his chair, her work-worn hands gentle on the armrest. "I am clean, sir. I am healthy. I have my medical papers from the hospital for my work. I can show you." Her voice cracked. "I am a mother. I cannot watch a baby die when I have milk, when I have arms to hold him. Please, let me try." Marcus looked down at James, at his son's labored breathing, at the translucent skin stretched over tiny bones, and he made a decision that defied logic, but answered to something deeper. He nodded. Rosa's face transformed with relief and determination. She settled into the rocking chair he vacated, and with quiet dignity she prepared herself and reached for the baby. Marcus placed James in her arms, this stranger who smelled of cleaning products and kindness. She cradled him close, adjusted her clothing, and guided him with the practiced ease of motherhood. For a moment, nothing happened. James whimpered, turning his head away as he had done countless times before. Then Rosa began to hum, a melody Marcus didn't recognize, something from her homeland perhaps. She rocked slowly, holding James against her heart, letting him hear the steady rhythm of life. She whispered to him in Spanish, words Marcus couldn't understand but whose meaning was universal: comfort, safety, love. And then, like a miracle unfolding in real time, James turned his head and latched on. He began to nurse. Marcus's knees buckled. Ed and he sank into the chair beside them, his hands covering his face as sobs shook his body. Rosa continued humming, tears streaming down her own cheeks, her eyes closed as she rocked the baby who was finally eating. James nursed urgently at first, then more calmly, his little hand resting against Rosa's chest, his breathing evening out. Minutes passed, 10, 15, 20, the longest James had eaten since his mother died. When he finally finished and fell into peaceful sleep, his little face looked different already, less gray, more present in the world. Rosa looked at Marcus with such joy, such pure happiness at having helped this child, that Marcus felt something shift in his soul. This woman who cleaned offices for minimum wage had given his son what all his billions could not provide: the simple, profound gift of human compassion, of a mother's love freely offered to a child not her own. Over the following days, Rosa came twice daily, in the early morning before her work shift, and in the evening after. She never accepted extra money, though Marcus tried desperately to pay her, to set up accounts, to change her life as she had changed his. She refused everything except car fare. "This is not business," she told him firmly. "This is what humans do. This is what mothers do." But she did accept his request to bring her own baby, 8-month-old Miguel, to the apartment while she nursed James. Marcus's mother helped care for Miguel during these visits, and a beautiful routine emerged. The two babies would lie together on a blanket afterward, and James began gaining weight, growing stronger, returning to life. The doctors Marcus called in to examine the situati were baffled, but couldn't argue with results. James was thriving. They talked about bonding theory, about pheromones and emotional nutrition, about how babies sometimes need more than calories to survive. But Marcus understood the deeper truth. His son had needed love in its purest form, offered without expectation, without boundary, from one human heart to another. As weeks passed, Rosa became part of their lives in ways that transcended her original role. She was James's lifeline, yes, but she became more. She was the person who had stepped across the enormous divide between their worlds to offer grace when it was needed most. Marcus learned her story, how she had immigrated from Guatemala 12 years ago, how she worked 3 jobs to support her 4 children and send money to family back home, how her husband had died in a construction accident 5 years earlier. She cleaned offices, worked weekends at a laundromat, and took overnight shifts at a nursing home. Yet she had time and heart enough to save a stranger's child. Marcus's perspective, already shattered by loss, reconstructed itself around new understandings. He had thought success meant conquest, meant building higher and reaching farther. But watching Rosa hum to his son, seeing her calloused hands gentle on James's head, he understood that true wealth was measured differently. When James was strong enough, when he had transitioned successfully to bottles and formula supplemented with Rosa's milk, when the crisis had passed and survival became certainty, Marcus sat down with Rosa for a conversation he had been planning for weeks. He had learned to approach her with respect, not assumption, to offer wrath, than impose. He had established education funds for all her children, which she had tearfully accepted. He had hired her sister at his company's corporate kitchen with triple her previous salary, but now he wanted to offer more. "Rosa," he said, his voice thick with emotion they now shared freely, "you gave James life. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me what it means to be human." She smiled, that warm smile that had become so familiar, so treasured. "You would have done the same, Mr. Marcus. In your heart, you would have done the same." Marcus wasn't sure that was true, wasn't sure the man he had been before loss had humbled him would have possessed such capacity. But he wanted to become the man she believed existed. He offered her a position, not as charity, but as recognition. Director of Family Services at the foundation he was establishing in his late wife's name, focused on supporting struggling mothers, on providing breast milk to babies in need, on building bridges between communities divided by wealth. Rosa accepted, not because she needed rescue, Marcus realized, but because she recognized the work's value. She brought to the foundation what she had brought to his son, pure, unconditional care grounded in the understanding that every human life holds equal worth, equal beauty, equal claim to compassion. The foundation grew, funded by Marcus's wealth, but guided by Rosa's wisdom, and it transformed countless lives while transforming Marcus himself. He returned to his company changed, leading now with different priorities, seeing his workers not as assets, but as humans, with stories as complex and valuable as his own. Years later, Marcus would watch James play with Miguel and Rosa's other children in the garden of the home Rosa had been able to purchase through her new position, and he would feel gratitude so profound it took his breath away. The two boys were brothers in all the ways that mattered, bound by the milk they shared, by the love that had flowed across boundaries that should never have existed in the first place. Rosa would catch his eye across the garden and smile, and in that smile was everything that mattered: recognition, respect, shared understanding of the miracle they had witnessed together. The miracle wasn't that a cleaning woman had saved a billionaire's baby, though that was the story the media eventually told, simplified and sensationalized. The real miracle was simpler and more profound. It was the truth that love recognizes no hierarchy, that compassion flows most freely from those who know suffering, that the greatest wealth we possess is our capacity to give of ourselves when giving seems to cost everything. Marcus had learned that in his darkest hour, when all his power proved meaningless, salvation had come through an open heart and willing hands, through a woman who saw a baby suffering and could not look away. Rosa had taught him that we are all connected, all responsible for one another, all capable of being angels to strangers if we choose compassion over indifference. And James, growing strong and joyful, was living proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the simplest packages: a mother's milk, a stranger's kindness, a moment of grace that changes everything. The lesson lingered, spreading ripples through every life Marcus touched, every decision he made, through the foundation that now helped thousands of families. We are never as rich as when we give, never as powerful as when we serve, never as blessed as when we recognize our shared humanity and act upon it with open hearts. In the end, that recognition, that choice to see and serve the sacred in every human soul, is the only currency that truly matters.